First of all, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming out here to watch me talk today. Thank you. The guys up front, these guys are cool. Appreciate it. Thank you guys for coming. As I said, the name of my session today is actually called Prove You Are You in a Zero Trust World. So a little bit about me. I am your presenter today. My name is Len Noe. I am a technical evangelist, a white hat, and a biohacker for CyberArk. I get a lot of questions, so I'll knock this one out before we get too far in. What is a biohacker? I have 10 different microchips in my elbows all the way to my hands that I use for offensive security. That is not today's talk. So if you're interested in that, you can look me up on LinkedIn. The videos are there. So let's start out today. I like to get people to think when they come to my session. So I want to start by asking everybody a question. It's not my plan for you to have an answer to the question by the end of this talk. It's my hope that you'll be thinking about this question pretty much for a while after this is over. So here is it. Here's the million-dollar question in Las Vegas today. Who are you? I know that seems like a pretty easy question. You more than likely would answer with maybe your name, or if you're in the scene, maybe you'd give me your hacker handle. Now I'm going to flip the script on you and ask you to prove it. Prove to me you are who you say you are. This is where things really start to get a bit more complicated. How do you validate who you are conclusively? You can show me your ID, maybe your birth certificate. And these are 100% uncompromisable, correct? What about biometric data? That's unique to me as an individual, right? How about the historical data, things like my mother's maiden name or previous addresses, the schools I attended? There's no database out there that would have that kind of information sitting in it, I'm sure. The truth is, there is not a single unique identifier for an individual that can't be counterfeited, compromised, or bypassed anymore. I can see from your faces here that just by saying that out loud, we can all see the flaws in the logic behind saying that anything is actually secure beyond any reasonable doubt. Our identities, as we move down this technology road, they're going to become more and more important as the time goes on. Just by the fact that counterfeits are becoming easier, more convincing, deep fake, AI, we are actually succumbing to the allure of technology at every single turn, and we're running blindly into a digital war that I can pretty much guarantee that we are not prepared for. So let's bring up the buzzwords. Anybody here not heard the two words zero trust before? Let's be honest. This is kind of the big buzzwords in the industry right now. Trust but validate. If we're talking about digital files, we can use things like PKI. If we're talking about web, we can use things like SSL. But how do we validate an individual? How do you prove you are who you say you are? Typically, the answer we always get is MFA, right? What is MFA? Something you have, something you know, something that you are. So let's look at what we've got here. Something you know, a username or a passcode. Something you have. YubiKey, mobile devices. If you're like me, maybe you're using an actual cryptobionic identity implant chip. Something you are. Fingerprints, retinal scans, iris scans, facial recognition. All of this stuff that we're seeing, this is how we see MFA. And we look at these as if these are things that can't be bypassed. At a very high level, I'm sure everyone here understands how important a session cookie is. And if we're dealing with web, if I can get a hold of a session cookie in an active session, I can bypass your MFA. But we still rely on MFA. So let's take a look at some history around the concepts of biometrics. Believe it or not, biometrics have been around actually for thousands and thousands of years. That being said, the methods of advanced exponentially since their inception, but the earliest accounts of biometric data can actually be backdated to 500 BC, back in the Babylonian Empire. The first record of a biometric identification system was actually in Paris back in the 1800s, and a method was developed to actually look at specific body measurements for the classification and comparison of criminals. It was rudimentary, but it was still there in the 1800s. Fingerprinting came next back in the 1880s. Not only as a method of identification for criminals, but actually also as a form of signature for legal documents. You were actually putting your fingerprint on things back in the 1880s. So all of the concepts around biometrics have been around for a long, long time. Believe it or not, facial recognition has actually been around since the 1960s. The earliest pioneers of this were a couple of scientists back in 1964 and 1965, respectfully, and they were actually able to map what they called landmarks on the face. In the beginning, it was very few. You had your eyes, your mouth, your ears, your chin, and that was really about it. Back then, there really wasn't much to it, but that advanced up through the 1970s, where they were actually able to increase the total number of landmarks for facial recognition up to 21 different subjective markers. Then in 1981, they actually introduced new projects that were actually released by DARPA and Ferret. These guys were encouraging the commercial adoption of facial recognition and biometrics as an authentication. So this was actually pushed by a lot of our larger government agencies. And then in 2006, there was the Face Recognition Grand Challenge, if you guys have never heard of that. This is where different companies were actually being given monetary and tax incentives to try and integrate biometric technology into the mobile markets. So back in 2010, Facebook began implementing facial recognition capabilities within their back-end programs to actually be able to identify photos and individuals within photos that were posted to the platform. And then September 12th, 2017. Can anybody tell me what happened on that day? Go for it. Well, launch of the iPhone 10. Exactly. The iPhone 10, the first consumer grade electronic that allowed for facial recognition to unlock the device. I mean, we've seen the fingerprint scanners on multiple mobiles, but the iPhone 10 was actually when the world was really introduced to advanced biometrics. Since then, we've seen them in airports, things like Clear. You have different third-party services that you can actually get quicker access through lines at amusement parks, concerts, and other events. We've seen, let's talk about the eyes for a minute. I know we're going to talk a lot today about just different parts of the body, so bear with me. But by the time this is all over, you're going to see these are not what we should be using as our actual authentication methods. So when we talk about scanning someone's eyes, everybody thinks there's basically just an eye scan. But believe it or not, we have two different options here. You have retinal scans as well as iris scans. And when people are talking about scanning your eyes, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be actually an iris, not a retinal scan. But this technology has actually been around since the early 80s. The objective behind speaker verification, so let's get into voices. And the reason I'm giving you a little back history, because we're about to dissect every single one of these. So when it comes to actual voice authentication, we have two different options. You have a password or a passphrase. Passwords are exactly what they say. It's me saying a simple word or saying a phrase. Then you have the ability to listen for the camber and the caster of the voice. But once again, we have AI now. So where does that leave us? Honestly, like I said, most people got their first introduction into biometrics through the use of their mobile devices. Two-factor authentication was, believe it or not, invented back in, well, 1961 is the approximated date where we started to see MFA come in and start actually combining with some of the existing biometric technologies. And if you really want to know who was the creator of it, you can get into that controversial argument because AT&T says they did it, but then again, there are 3 other companies that said they did it at the exact same time. So we don't really know where this concept of MFA came from, but we know it's been around at this point for almost, let's see, 1960, 40? We're looking at almost 70 years, guys, of multi-factor within the computer technology scope. You know, for a long time, MFA providers really had an issue, because if you think back to what MFA used to be, everybody here over the age of about 35, 40 years old that worked in the industry, we all remember those little RSA fobs. You know, and this was one of the big problems when it came to early adoption around multi-factor authentication, because there was a lot of upfront cost. And if somebody lost their fob, it wasn't practical. It did not enhance or do anything to make a smooth transition for the end user. And this is one of the reasons why you really only saw it in very large enterprises. But once we started seeing the ability to do OTP as well as FIDO and U2F on mobile devices, this is when we started seeing the springing of all of these different authentication and identity platforms and providers come out there. You know, so MFA got worldwide attention back when things like Apple, Android, Google, Facebook, Twitter, eBay, they started to integrate that multi-factor challenge and response into their authentication routines to access their platforms. But now, let's look at today. We see all of these same platforms removing that capability and trying to push it onto a third party to take care of your MFA. At the end of the day, we are responsible for our own security, and therefore we need to be able to maintain that we have the ownness. So we've talked a lot about where MFA started, the different types of biometric multi-factor authentication options that are available. Now let's talk about how we get past them. So let's talk about retinal scans. Believe it or not, retinal scans can actually be compromised through the use of a high-resolution infrared photo or contact lenses. Voice print, deep fake. We're going to get into a lot of this over the course of the next couple of slides. This is actually one of the current scams that's being done, and I can even speak to a little bit on this from personal experience. Apparently, my mom, in her 70s, got a call from someone claiming to be my nephew, had my nephew's voice, told my mom that he was actually in an auto accident and had injured someone and needed money for a bail bondsman. The fact that this person was calling and saying they were in New York City when my nephew lives with me in Texas and my mom lives in Michigan should have raised a few red flags, but it sounded like my nephew. Facial recognition. We have multiple different options. You know, I'm not one of those class participation people, but if you want to join in, you're more than welcome to. Anybody, how many people in here have an iPhone? Anyone? Did you know that you guys, for the longest time, to bypass the Face ID on an Apple phone, all you needed to do was to wait for someone to actually fall asleep, put a set of glasses on them, take a black Sharpie, put 2 black dots where the eyes would be, and it would open right up. The lenses, they are not able to process the actual irises or the eyes or the eye locations. So it's basically a glitch in the secure Face ID, but that's all it takes. Then we have deep fakes. You know, one of the big things that we see a lot around these type of biometric authentications is the use of the term liveliness. You guys familiar with this one? Okay, for those of you that are not, liveliness means you can't just take a picture of someone and hold it up. They want to see movement. Sometimes you'll see actual processes where the authentication method will actually tell you, turn your head to the left, turn your head to the right. Well, now through the use of AI with deep fake, we can actually impersonate liveliness. Fingerprints. This one, I'm actually going to grab some. I want to give you some actual details. Here's the real life use case why fingerprints are not a good idea as a unique identifier. This has actually happened almost a decade ago. Have you ever wondered why you don't see too many politicians talking with their hands up anymore? Yes, but do you know the actual use case where it happened? I like it. See, you guys are my buddies. We're going to talk when this is over. All right, back in 2014, anybody here ever heard of a hacker group called the Chaos Computer Club? My man. In 2014, a member of the Chaos Computer Club, a German hacking collective, actually made the claim that they had cloned the thumbprint of the German politician by using commercial software and images that were taken at a news conference. The print actually belonged to the German Defense Minister Ursula von der Leyen. In 2018, police arrested 3 drug dealers in the United States by lifting prints from photos that the individuals had actually taken of themselves holding narcotics and posted to social media. I'm not kidding about this. You can Google it. You know, and if you look at the laws in the US regarding biometrics, anybody here know any federal laws that are protecting our biometric templates after they've actually been saved into a device? No. Do you know why? Because there isn't one. There are no federal laws at all to protect any of your biometric data. You know, there's multiple states that have actually adopted, state-level legislation around the biometric topic. You know, the most thorough is the Biometric Information Privacy Act, or BIPA, and this actually came out of the state of Illinois. You know, currently only Illinois, Texas, and Washington as of the end of 2022 had actual laws on the books to protect biometric information. The first quarter of 2023, there was actually no fewer than 7 states that had introduced new legislation to address the biometric template and the storage of biometric information. In all of those new states, that was actually California, Kentucky, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Missouri, and New York, have all now added new legislation that is working its way through their local legislatures based off of the BIPA from Illinois. But aside from that, at the federal level, you have no protection. So that leads us to the question of, what the hell do we do now? Anybody here know what is actually federally protected in terms of authentication? We have a thing in this country called the Fourth Amendment. According to the law books, the only thing that you have constitutional protections around would actually be either a password or a passcode. None of your biometric information is considered privileged according to the law books. So therefore, you have no legal recourse if you were to be detained by some type of law agency and you have an iPhone 10 or higher. They can legally walk up to you, hold the phone to your face, and then start going through your phone, and you have no legal recourse. They can do the same thing with a fingerprint. The only protections you have under the Constitution are for either a password or a passcode. Everything else is considered plain view. So we've talked a lot about biometrics, and the truth is, biometrics as a single point of access provides us no real security. I mean, maybe a little bit better than, some duct tape. But realistically, if somebody wants to get in, we have put all of our faith into what we see as our own unique specialness. But the truth is, there is nothing unique about any single one of us anymore that, like I said before, can't be duplicated, counterfeited, or bypassed. This is one of the ways that we do it. So once we actually get a hold of a device and we're going to use biometric authentication, has anybody actually ever taken a moment to see what happens during that enrollment process? At the end of the day, we're not actually mapping every single thing on our face or every single ridge on our fingers. There are predetermined what they call landmarks: cheekbones, nose, ears, eyes location, offset from center. Once they have all of this information, it's basically written down to what is called a biometric template file. Now, in most cases, especially when we're dealing with mobile devices, these are typically stored on the device. So, and myself included, if somebody can actually, you don't have your initial drive encrypted, if somebody can gain access to the actual mobile device, they can potentially gain access to the biometric template storage locations. At that point, it's just a file. You can then reverse engineer from those biometric templates, and you can either recreate a fingerprint. You could create a 3D printed mask that will bypass. You know, we need to look at how this stuff is stored. Is it on device? Is it server-based? You know, when we're dealing with biometrics, you can actually include blockchain technology as a separate step for a validation and authentication and auditability. But once we've tokenized all of this stuff and turned it into a file, we have to remember that at the end of the day, it's still just another file. And nobody at a security conference like Identiverse has ever heard of any bad actor stealing a file before, right? So at the end of it, this can be part of a strong security authentication posture, but it should not be the sole thing that you're basing as your source of truth. So we've talked a little bit about data and how it's being left out there. Let's look at some of the largest collectors of user data and just a little peek into some of the things that they're actually collecting. Google collects the most amount of data on any of its users. The study by Stock Apps actually went through and they tested, and Google collects almost 39 different pieces of information on its users across all of its platforms every minute, every second of every day. Twitter and Facebook, these guys collect even more. Facebook collects the most out of any single social media company with almost 39 different types of data. And one of the things about Facebook, when it comes to actually ending your time with Facebook, any posts or you've made on someone else's timelines, any type of photos that you've shared, if someone else is actually tagged in those photos, even after you're gone, that data will still remain. So this is how Facebook is actually making most of its actual money. So we've talked a little bit about deep fakes and being able to pass liveliness. This actually is an FBI warning that came out back in June 28th of 2022. Deep fakes and stolen PII were being utilized to apply for remote work positions within the IT industry. They're not saying what these particular bad actors were trying to do if they got connected, just that these would have been remote jobs. They would have had access to more PII. They would have had access to proprietary information. And all of it was stemmed by something that was stolen to begin with. How about this one? Everybody remember this? Elon Musk, they did a deep fake on him and were actually using it to promote different cryptocurrencies. This is one that actually really made me laugh. Bruce Willis, towards the end of 2022, his agent actually had to come out and make a public statement because there was a Russian deep fake company called Deepcake that had used Bruce Willis's likeness to do a telecom commercial for a Russian telephone company. And Deepcake actually came out and said that they had purchased the likeness rights for Bruce Willis, and they were going to be making a new Die Hard movie with him. So, right off the bat, we think about this for a minute and we can all laugh at it. But when you think about this, this is something that I think we really need to start opening the door and looking down that road. And the reason being, I don't have a slide for this because it's only happened within the last little while. But you guys can go out and actually Google. There was a YouTube influencer who decided to work with an AI company to create a digital girlfriend based off of all of the videos that she had put up on YouTube, along with some AI in the background, and she was actually selling the services of this virtual girlfriend for $1 a minute. So now we are in a position where, just like with Bruce Willis, you have someone whose likeness may be doing things that they may not approve of. Let's talk about Bruce for a second, and then we'll swing back to our influencer. Let's say for a moment that this was true. Let's say we have people like Bruce Willis, maybe Sylvester Stallone, Mickey Rourke. You know, you've got all of these aging actors. What happens when we start seeing deep fake companies coming in who are going to then license the rights to someone's actual physical appearance? We have no legislation or legal precedence for any of this. So if the fake Bruce Willis goes out and says something that would be career damaging or limiting, or even says something that may be, liable or culpable, who's responsible? Is it the real Bruce Willis, or is it the fake Bruce Willis? And in the minds of public opinion, does it matter because the person that's doing the talking looks and sounds like Bruce Willis? So to circle back to our influencer, as surprising as this may come, apparently this influencer never thought that people would try and do inappropriate things with her virtual AI. Once she saw what was going on, she then wanted to pull the plug. But we're now going down a different path of where does the law work and who's responsible. Take a look at this. And of course, no audio. So, if you've never seen this video before, just bear with me. This is actually President Barack Obama basically saying some really, really negative things about Ben Carson and all kinds of other stuff. Sounds like President Obama, looks like him sitting in the Oval Office. But the truth is, this was actually a commercial that was made, and you'll see here in just a moment, by the actor Jordan Poole. And the whole purpose behind this video that he put out was basically to say we, as the consumers of news, need to be very sure where we're getting our news sources from, because at this point, anybody now can look like anybody else, anybody can sound like anybody else. So we talk about our identities as if they are the most important things in the world, because for us, they are. But I want to show you guys what we're up against. Everybody here, I would like to think, has heard of the Genesis identity market on the darknet? Recently came down, they did the typical escrow, a bunch of money, and then decided to steal everybody's money and shut down in the middle of the night and run away. But this is some screenshots of the Genesis market before it actually shut down. So if you look in this first major paragraph there, it says the Genesis store specializes in selling fingerprints, cookies, script info, form grabbers and logs, saved logons, and other personal data obtained from different devices on the web. So this was what it looked like. It was one of the nicest identity markets you could ever go to. These guys were really so nice. They broke it down by country, how many they got over the last hour. I mean, you had metrics as if this was like a legit business. I mean, at the point where we took these screenshots, there was over 424,000 different identities available for purchase. And when we start looking down into these identities, you'll see why we are losing the fight against identity theft. So let's take a look at this individual here. So we've got, right off the top, Instagram, Tumblr, Office 365, Netflix, Microsoft Live, Amazon, Google, Twitter. This is somebody in the United States, and you can get all of this information for a whole whopping $59 US. Oh, that's not enough, though. Let's take a look at this one. So this one, we're going to get 18 known resources, 59 kind of not tier 1 level. We get 31 cookies, and yes, those would probably be session cookies and stateless cookies. And we're going to get 1,556 cookies out of Chrome, and we're going to get all of that for the massive amount of $24 US. Kind of depressing when you think about it. But this is why we're losing the identity security battle. Because at this point, with initial access brokers, we're not bothering to hack your tier 2 anymore. We're just going to buy the credentials outright and start with something that's not going to set off your analytics, set off your IDSs. One last person to take a look at. This one is actually one of my favorites. So we have over 408 edge cookies, 47 in Chrome. We have a fingerprinted browser, and you can get all of that for the whole whopping cost of $17. How do we as security professionals defend against that kind of reality? How much money have we put into phishing campaigns, multi-factor authentication, IDS, next generation firewalls, EDRs, analytics? Tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases. But at the same time, we're fighting against somebody that's going to sell the product once they've gotten it from us for nothing more than $17. So maybe it's time we start looking at things differently. Saying that we need these types of protections, they don't do anything to just magically make them appear. You know, I want to circle back for just a minute to the main talking point that we started out today with, and that's just zero trust, or trust but verify. To do that, we need to start with a true source of truth. We've already gone through the fact that biometrics in and of themselves, by themselves, are not going to be that source of truth. You know, the truth is, the only way we're going to be able to get through this until we can actually find some new technology is through a layered security approach and a true defense in depth strategy. So what's going to be our new source of truth? I mean, let's start thinking about this now, you know, because the truth is, this problem is not going to go away. You know, maybe we start adding additional factors. Maybe we start adding more heuristics. I'm not saying biometrics have no place. What I am saying is they need to be not the main piece. And when we talk about MFA, we really need to talk about multi-factor authentication, not just two. You know, maybe we start adding blockchain technology. You know, maybe we actually start looking at impossible travel. You know, the idea that we would need the same set of authentication processes regardless of where we are is as ignorant as saying that we don't need any type of secondary validation at all. You know, maybe the concept of the transhuman, maybe people like me and my kind, maybe we're going to be the next step. You know, to prove a point, I have a cryptobionic chip in my arm called the VivoKey Apex. If you've never heard of it, I highly encourage you to check them out. This thing will do PGP, it'll do BIP32, it'll do FIDO2, it'll do OTP. But unlike your standard OTP apps where, you know, all I have to do is just get on the phone, open the app, and it'll just sit there and spit codes out every 60 seconds, I actually have to validate that app through NFC against my own cryptobionic chip just to open the app. It'll give me one OTP. If I want another one, I have to scan the implant again. There's some validation, and at this point it's 512, AES 512 encrypted, so I think that's pretty safe at the moment. Is that going to be the answer? Probably not. Aside from me, does anybody here think that shoving a big microchip in your arm just to be able to, do two-factor or multi-factor seem like a good idea? Anybody? All in favor of implants, raise your hand. Wow, once again, I'm the only one with my hand up here. But it's an option. I'm not saying it's the path to take, but it's an option. And we need to start talking about what's coming next. We've all seen, the idea of, I just logged in here in beautiful Las Vegas, and now I just logged in 10 minutes later in Seoul, Korea. That doesn't work. Start using that. Are you accessing from a device that we know of? Has it been fingerprinted? Are you accessing during normal business hours? Are you coming in from an IP that we know of? A lot of these kinds of additional factors we can actually do as the security professionals on the back end, and our end users don't even need to know. Do I need 5 factors if they're logging into a device that's hardlined into the LAN? Probably not. Do I want 5 factors if it's one of my sales guys and he's traveling in another country? Probably. I keep saying, when are we going to start seeing something like IVAS, Identity Validation as a Service? Let's be honest. We've all seen over the course of the last 5 to 7 years, all of the major browsers, all of the major search engines, if you're just running a straight HTTP website without SSL, they pretty much have tried to eliminate that as a possibility. So we've all learned when it comes to the web, look for the SSL, look for the lock. What do we do when it comes to validating that I'm the one who's actually giving you the message? Through AI, we're seeing all kinds of new attack vectors. Things like ChatGPT being used to ingest your C-level executives' social media, being able to figure out their speech patterns, how they talk. Targeted spear phishing is like nothing we've ever seen before. You've got things like Keybase out there. That's great. And we all understand public key, private key, PKI style encryption, and handshakes. But that doesn't work for when I'm trying to connect to you over Teams, does it? Or if I'm on the phone with you and I just dial you up and I'm using a AI voice generator. What happens when we start seeing all of this type of stuff that we're throwing out there? What happens when we start seeing that being combined with predictive analytics? What happens when we start seeing all these tidbits of PII that we're leaving left behind? We now have what I like to call synthetic identity. And the truth is, yes, this is a shameless plug, but we're getting close to the end here. I'm actually doing a second talk that's going to be, all of you are invited to. It's as soon as this one's over. I'm actually going to show you what that looks like. Because I did it. I doxed myself. I took all the information that was freely available about me, and I pumped it all into ChatGPT, and I was actually able to interact with a digital version of me. I was able to fish self-service recovery portal questions. But we need things like identity validation. We need to know exactly how we're going to be able to validate things moving forward. It's a big joke today. Every time the political, season rolls around, it doesn't matter which side you're on, what your party affiliations are. At the end of every single political advertisement, we've all heard this and probably made the jokes about it. I'm so-and-so and I approve this message. Because nobody believes what we see anymore. We're now living in a world where I can look like anyone and I can sound like anyone. So the ability for you to be able to know that you are talking to the real Len Noe is going to become even more crucial as we continue to move down this technology path. So, future solutions. There isn't one yet. That's the problem. We have to work with what we have, and this is where the ability to layer the defenses becomes paramount. It's my hopes, like I said at the beginning when I asked you the question, who are you? By this point, I think in the conversation you should be asking yourself a couple of different questions. When Len asked me, who am I, which what's he talking about? Is he talking about the physical me? Is he talking about the digital me? Is there even a line between the two anymore? Because I don't really think there is. We start, like I said, we turn MFA into a true MFA, not just two-factor. Adding as many additional factors as you can until you can feel comfortable to the point where your risk has been mitigated, that you are actually interacting with the person that you think that you're actually talking to. Everything from geolocations, certificates, make it all part of that authentication process. Through security orchestration, this stuff is not as hard as it used to be anymore, and the end user experience is pretty seamless at this point. You know, if you don't like that idea, go PKI or FIDO. You've got options. The exhibit hall, I know of 3 right off the top of my head. You know, next generation firewalls configured in a Red Forest architecture, providing complete separation of tiers that can only be traversed via proxy, along with secure credential boundaries. You know, privileged access management for all your privileged accounts, real-time network taps for aggregation of SIMs with analytics, security orchestration for automated response to any actual alerts. You know, I understand as we're sitting here talking that to implement all of this costs a lot of money. Money that probably we don't have in our budgets. So do what you can. How many people have traded convenience for security, less incident tickets for minimum requirements, when we could be doing so much more? This has been a balancing act for anybody that's been in this industry for any amount of time. We know. You know, it's not a threat until it becomes a threat, and once it becomes a threat, it's too late. So the point is, together, use what you have to make the best possible solution out of what you have available. And in conclusion, we are not special snowflakes. And to steal a line from Fight Club, given a long enough timeline, all of our chances of survival go down to 0. Our ability to look at the human as a whole and find a unique, non-compromisable attribute doesn't exist anymore. Additionally, when we look at the cost of a stolen identity being under $20, including fingerprint biometric templates, we see that the value of our identities as an individual is only valuable to each of us individually. It's valuable not from a marketable perspective unless you're Bruce Willis or, you know, this YouTube influencer, you know, and you're wanting to sell access to your mannerisms and your behaviors for $1 a minute. But from an amount of money, time, and resources and pain that it would be caused by having to try and recover your identity if it's been compromised. Remember, there is no federal protections for biometric data, and ultimately all of our fingerprints, facial scans, everything is converted back to that digital files, and we all know how successful files can be stolen and manipulated. I've said it before, and I'm going to close on this note. Our identities need to be our most prized possession, because no matter how boring or unimportant we think we are, you're still very valuable to any bad actor, and your identity can be used against you. So with that, I would like to open it up for Q&A. One second. Again, if anybody would like to see the synthetic identity, it's going to be right next door. As soon as this is over, you're all welcome to join. Sir. Yeah, you.
May I just challenge one thing that you said?
Please.
That the insecurity of biometrics arises from how easy it is to steal. A biometric template.
Oh, agreed.
But the security of biometrics lies in the uniqueness of the genuine article. And therefore, actually, the root of biometric security is not the level of how much you can protect the template, but it's in the liveness, which you skated over. Strong liveness can prevent...
Well, I agree. We're finally getting to the point, and I've actually been talking to some people here at this show where they've actually started looking at what the AI can't do. You know, up until recently, everybody's been so focused on what AI can that they haven't looked at the fact that it's the things that they can't, and that's where we're going to be able to detect. Eyes are a big thing when it comes to AI and deep fake. The eyes typically don't blink. That's one thing you can tell right off the bat. If you see an AI that doesn't blink at all, or a video, probably AI. To your point, I agree. The individuals themselves, but what I was going after is the technology around the authentication as a single form of authentication. And I agree with what you're saying, but I will stand by my statement that as a single attribute, not good. As part of a larger defense in depth strategy, yeah, definitely. But for those people that think, you know, and I'm just going to use the mobile devices for this example. Anyone who thinks that just having a fingerprint or a face ID on your mobile device is secure, you really need to look at what that could lead to. My point is, I would say the same thing about just a username and a password. You know, any single point of authentication is probably not a good idea. That's why I am pushing the concepts of adaptive multi-factor. Use what we have at our disposal, because the truth is, if somebody wants it bad enough, these are not the most secure options that you have. You know, it's basically to knock down the idea that, you know, just because you can open it with your fingerprint, that's not as safe as FIDO or, you know, a certificate-based YubiKey or something along those lines. You know, they both have their pros and their cons, but they should be used to complement each other, not in lieu of each other. Ma'am.
So we've heard a lot about passkeys, and that's using these biometrics, but then there's no more MFA, so now you're kind of freaking me out over here, because my biometrics are basically just stored as an encrypted number, right? I don't need necessarily your iris. I just need to know what that
Correct.
encryption is. So what could be a second factor?
At that point, I would actually look to, first of all, passwords, in my opinion, should always be in there somewhere. I would say password, biometric, from a fingerprint, a device that's been fingerprinted by your organization. If you're coming in from, are you on the LAN or the WAN, or are you actually hardlined in? There's so many different things that you can do, and a lot of your identity platforms have a lot of these alternate factors built in as part of their authentication routines. It's just up to you whether or not you turn them on. So time of day, initiating IP address location, fingerprinted device, possible biometric scan with a password. You've got 6 factors right there at that point.
Because on that same note, I already at this point don't really trust my facial recognition, because I have multiple apps on my phone that are set up for that, and I can look away and it still checks yes. So what's happening?
Yeah.
Storage session, or
It depends on the device and whether or not it's actually utilized. I'm assuming you were talking about an iPhone. If the third-party device is actually utilizing the Face ID protocol on the device itself, or if they've written their own authentication to utilize the camera, hard to say. I don't advocate for biometrics on mobile devices at all. I mean, to each their own, but you will never have any type of issues from a legal standpoint. If you are locked up, you cannot be forced to give up that password, period, end of story. And as I know it's disgusting to say, but I mean, if you all remember when there was that terrorist attack in California about 7-8 years ago, the attacker actually had an iPhone, and the government was trying to compel Apple to actually break into the phone to gain access. They couldn't do it, and they could not force that individual to give up his password. So another company actually did get into the phone by actually cloning the device, and that therefore being able to get past the total number of incorrect tries before it actually bombed out, and then they just kept spinning up that same image and continuing down the brute force password chain until they actually got the password. Sir?
Do you think there's any room for just
I think if there's going to be the use of biometrics, honestly, the integration of biometric templates with blockchain technology as the back end is probably one of the most secure way, or taking the actual template and tokenizing it as opposed to leaving it as a biometric template. Those would be the two most secure options that you would have. I think that there's always, oh, you disagree?
You're trying to find ways of keeping secret something that is already a public
Oh, I agree with you. It's not.
The core of biometric security is not the secrecy of the template, it's the liveness test, it's the forgery detection.
That is agreed as well.
About how you keep a public credential more and more secret is ridiculous.
I agree. I absolutely agree with what you're saying. You know, the templates, the reason I hound on the templates is the fact of the lack of the regulation. And the ability, if someone was to actually gain access to the template and gain access to the landmark information, then you have something that you can actually use to try and make a physical counterfeit that could actually bypass the fraud tests. But you would need to be one hell of an important guy to want to go that far. You know, my point is not that, you know, I'm getting called from the back. I've got a second talk over there. Sir, I would love to talk to you about this more. Once I'm done, I have this next session is starting up next door in 10 minutes. I will be back at the CyberArk booth up on the trade floor afterwards. I would love to continue this discussion with you.